Ladies and gentlemen, heads up. Huge rocket looks set for uncontrolled re-entering following Chinese space station launch. It's brought to us by Andrew Jones. And I gotta tell you, as your planetary defense commander, space agencies and war are pretty complex smoke and mirror subjects. But I do my best to break it down for you. And if you think I do a good job and would like me to continue, every month I do a fundraiser to keep THORnews up and running and to continue on as your planetary defense commander. And so it is that time of the month, baby. And if you'd like to make a contribution, I got a snail mail, a Venmo, a PayPal, a CashApp, a Patron. I'm only $1,739 away from my goal with 3.5 days left. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the future, and the future is pretty wild. And part of my whole thing is I stay optimistic pretty much no matter what's happening. Did I mention we were at Space News? Great. We're talking about a huge rocket looks set for uncontrolled re-entry following Chinese space station launch. This is a modern-day adventure in space junk. And to me, one of the biggest stories that's really popped up in April is the fact that China is building its own space station, and Russia is pulled out of the ISS and will transfer over to China's space station. And so if you have China and Russia competing against the USA for military dominance, and then you have our own space agency, this king, Elon Musk, trying to get currency dominance with Bitcoin and Doge over the dollar. It's just weird, man. It's just weird. Then the USA seems to be in a weird spot. Long March 5-core B stage likely to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere in coming days. Helsinki, China launched the first module for its space station into orbit late Wednesday. But the missing launcher also reached orbit and is slowly, unpredictably heading back to Earth. And they like to say that rocket science is hard, although that terminology came about like in the 50s. And so it's still around 70 years later. But if you think rocket technology is hard, then putting up new telescopes more advanced than the Hubble seems to be impossible, since we just passed the Hubble telescope's 31-year anniversary of being in space. So it still blows my mind that the United States, or even the military that we know of, doesn't really have a new and improved telescope other than the one we had in the Hubble. Anyway, I'm bouncing around as I tend to do. All right, so China launched parts of its core to build its space station, and then apparently the stuff went up properly, but the rocket fell back in ways that they hadn't planned on. So this is just collecting to all the space junk that is up, supposedly, in our upper atmosphere. The Long March 5B, a variant of China's largest rocket, successfully launched the 22.5 metric ton Taihanhi module from Wenchang Thursday local time. And I just want to say again, I still think they should all work, every country should work together. Like having competing space agencies at this point seems really weird. So I don't know, man. Because remember, like, they came out with nukes in the 40s, and so we were like 80 years into the atomic age. And the fact that we are keeping it together by avoiding mutually assured destruction, you know, at some point in time, it just seems like everybody would be better off if they worked together, especially when you have like 400,000 cases of the coronavirus in India, and they have thousands of people dying. I would guess at their peak, if based on the American situation and knowing that India's medical system is not even as good as ours, that they will see over 10,000 deaths a day. I mean, that's just mind-blowing, bro. It's very Nostradamus, what he called the Great Furnace, and in the Great Furnace are burning humans. Crazy days indeed, my friends. Yeah, you could definitely make a weird apocalypse Armageddon case if you wanted to. Tahani separated from the core stage of launcher after 492 seconds of flight, directly entering its planned initial orbit. So yeah, the part made it into orbit. Designed specifically to launch space station modules into low Earth orbit, the Long March 5B uniquely uses a core stage and 4 side boosters to place its payload directly into the low Earth orbit. However, this core stage is now also in orbit and is likely to make an uncontrolled re-entry over the next days or week as growing interaction with the atmosphere drags it to Earth. If so, it will be one of the largest instances of uncontrolled re-entry of a spacecraft and could potentially land on an inhabited area. So, that's super interesting. We had a situation like this with the THORnews back in 2017. I did an edited video on it. Maybe I'll put in the link or whatever. More expendable rocket first stages do not reach orbital velocity and re-enter the atmosphere and land in a predefined re-entry zone. Most expendable rocket first stages. Some other larger second stages perform deorbit burns to lower altitude to reduce time in orbit and lower chances of collisions with other spacecraft, or to immediately re-enter the atmosphere. There had been speculation that the Long March 5B core would perform an active maneuver to deorbit itself, but that appears not to have happened. At a Wenchang press conference Thursday, Wang Zhu, Commander-in-Chief of Long March 5B launch vehicle, stated, Chinese, that this second Long March 5B had seen improvements over the first launch, but a possible deorbit maneuver was not stated. Ground-based radars used by the U.S. military to track spacecraft and other objects in space have detected an object and cataloged it as the Long March 5B rocket body, now designated 2021-35B. The roughly 30-meter long, 5-meter-wide Long March 5 core stage is in a 170 by 372-kilometer altitude orbit, traveling at more than 7 kilometers per second. A possible amateur ground observation of the rocket core showing regular flashes suggests that it is tumbling and thus not under control. Jonathan McDowell, still no TLEs for the Vega launch, one more TLE for the Object B and the Tianhe launch, whose slow decay rate confirms it is the CZ-5B core stage. So this is a pretty crazy situation, bro. Maybe melt it with a laser? The first launch of the Long March 5B also saw the first stage reach orbit and make an uncontrolled re-entry 6 days later. Re-entry occurred over the Atlantic Ocean according to the U.S. Space Force's 18th Space Control Squadron. Had that event taken place 15 to 30 minutes earlier, debris not destroyed by the heat of the re-entry could have landed on U.S. soil. Had that event taken place 15 minutes earlier, debris not destroyed by the heat of the re-entry could have landed on U.S. soil. And the incident drew criticism from then NASA's administrator, Jim Bridenstine. When and where the new Long March 5B stage will land is impossible to predict. The decay of its orbit will increase as atmospheric drag brings it down into more denser atmosphere, I guess. The speed of this process depends on its size and density of the object, and variables include atmospheric variations and fluctuations, which are themselves influenced by solar activity and other factors. The high speed of the rocket body means it orbits the Earth roughly every 90 minutes, and so a change of just a few minutes in re-entry time results in re-entry point thousands of kilometers away. The Long March 5B core stage orbital inclination of 41.5 degrees means that the rocket body passes a little farther north than New York, Madrid, Beijing, and as far south as Chile, Wellington, New Zealand, and could make its re-entry at any point within this area. The most likely event will see any debris surviving the intense heat of re-entry falling into the oceans or uninhabited areas. But the risk remains of property damage to people. The risk remains of damage to people or property. Spaceflight observer Jonathan McDowell told Space News that the previous Long March 5B launch saw the most massive uncontrolled re-entry in decades and the fourth biggest ever. The Long March 5B core stage is 7 times more massive than the Falcon 9 second stage that caused a lot of press attention a few weeks ago when it re-entered above Seattle and dumped a couple of pressure tanks on Washington State. Whee! Wait, how many times bigger? 7 times more massive. Wow. All right. McDowell said he hoped China would have enhanced the core stage to perform a controlled deorbit after separating from THORnews. I think by current standards, it's unacceptable to let it re-enter uncontrolled, McDowell said. Since 1990, nothing over 10 tons has been deliberately left in orbit to re-enter uncontrolled. The Long March 5B core stage, without its 4 side boosters, is thought to have a dry mass, or when it's empty, a propellant of about 21 metric tons in mass. Holger Krag, head of the Space Safety Program Office for the European Space Agency, says from their experience there is an average amount of mass, about 100 tons, re-entering in an uncontrolled way per year. Well, that's reassuring. This relates to about 50 to 60 individual events per year. And I've done a couple of videos on the cascading space debris situation where one big piece could hit a bunch of pieces and they all start raining down on Earth at one point. It's possible. It's another reason why you need planetary defense, planetary space junk picking up, cleaning up and stuff, because LLC corporations can just pretty much launch whatever they want up there, asterisk, and then aren't really responsible for the trash. It's kind of like trash on Earth. Asterisk. It's always difficult to assess the amount of surviving mass and number of fragments without knowing the design of the object, but a reasonable rule of thumb is about 20 to 40% of the original dry mass. Components made of heat-resistant materials such as tanks and thrusters made stainless steel or titanium can reach the ground. Surviving objects will fall vertically after deceleration and travel at terminal velocity. And if it hits you, it's probably definitely terminal velocity. The largest and most famous incident was the 1979 re-entry of NASA's 76-ton Skylab, and I remember watching that as a kid and be like, oh my gosh, wow. It's a pretty fascinating moment in time, really, whose uncontrolled re-entry scattered debris across the Indian Ocean and Western Australia. Nighttime re-entry could make for spectacular viewing, as with a recent re-entry of a Falcon 9 second stage with debris fortunately not causing any harm. China's 8-ton Tiangong-1 Space Lab made a high-profile uncontrolled re-entry in 2018, while the successor Tiangong was deorbited in a controlled manner in 2019. And they put up this thing. It's the solar panels. Kind of looks like super space lasers, man. Anyway, yeah, it's all weird. Everything's weird. We're in the future, and the future is very strange. So we won't have to pay attention to the story, but a lot of people have been launching a lot of rockets lately. And so what are they doing up there? A lot is happening in our upper atmosphere. That I can almost guarantee you. All right. Hopefully you guys will keep me on as your planetary defense commander. The best way to do that is send contributions to my snail mail, my PayPal, my Venmo, my CashApp, my Patron. Got 3.5 days left of my fundraiser. Only $1,739 left to raise. Thank you very much to Asteroid Fight Club, Mona, Ann, Jason, Andrea, James, Margaret, and everybody cool out there in the world. The future is wild, and I definitely thought it would have been more fun. When I was younger, I thought we'd have jetpacks by now, which we do not. Okay, we're still stuck on the 1868 petroleum engine. Strange days indeed. God bless everyone. Have a great weekend.